From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. Hello, welcome to the show. Thank you for tuning in. As always, we've got Matt behind the camera, Noel's working on the podcast as we speak, Agent Scully's over there. I'm Ben, you're you. This is stuff they don't want you to know. And this week, we're looking at something that you, as well as many other listeners, had asked us to talk about in detail on our audio podcast, and that is Jinn, genies. Probably the first thing you think when you hear that word, if you're in the West, would be, rubbing a lamp and then some big blue creature emerges in a puff of smoke and sounds exactly like Robin Williams on coke. But that's not exactly what Jinn are. And here are 5 things you may not know about Jinn. Number 1, as we just mentioned, the genies we see in pop culture are not the Jinn of folklore, nor the Jinn of various religious practices. Not by any means. Instead of this friendly, sing-songy kind of character that for some reason is bound to a lamp, the world of Jinn is wide and varied, and Jinn, like human beings, have free will. So some are good, some are evil, some are just unpredictable. And we see regional variation throughout history in the way that Jinn were treated. This is present in the etymology of the word, because Jinn would be the plural, genie, J-I-N-N-I, would be a singular Jinn. And then also, this same root word is related to the idea of genius. And I know what you're thinking, wait, genius? I mean, they sound similar, but that's such an old word. Doesn't that go back to Greco-Roman times? The answer is yes, which leads us to number 2. Belief in Jinn is very, very old. It predates Islamic culture. Before people were practicing Islam, cultures believed in Jinn, and they didn't believe in them as another form of life created by God along with man and along with angels. No, they believed in Jinn as tributary spirits. In some parts of the world, they were venerated the way you would venerate an ancestor. In other parts, they were treated as demigods or nature spirits of some sort. And then in still other parts, they were vilified as demons. And sometimes they were thought of as the guardians of a place, beneficial, which is similar to the legends of house, like brownies or fairies in European culture. So we know this is true because we have found archaeological evidence. In one example, Palmyra in northwestern Arabia, there is an Aramaic inscription at a village called Beth Fasiel, and this pays tribute to what is called the genie, the good and abiding spirit, the guardian of a place. And if we want to play with the etymology, that's related to the idea of Roman cultures when people would say they have a genius. It didn't mean that they were smart at the time. It meant that they were attributing the things that they had done well or ill with to a guardian spirit of some sort. However, Jinn are present in the Quran, and they are mentioned several times in the text of this book. If you look at the creation story, where man is made by God out of clay, beforehand, the Jinn are made, also by God, out of a scorching, smokeless fire. Number 3, Jinn are not all the same, not all created equally, and had a society just like human beings. So they would have courts, they would have relationships, marriages, they would even fool around with humans reputedly. And Jinn could have different power levels, just as they could have different alignments on the good and bad scale. So the most powerful Jinn, the ones that Robin Williams' character in Aladdin is based on, the ones that could actually do things for you if you command them, were thought, oddly enough, to be largely evil. Also the most powerful of the Jinn. And the whole idea, the whole magic lamp idea that Westerners have taken and applied to all Jinn comes from that story, comes from a translation or a telling of that story. Because if you read the actual story of Aladdin, what happens is that a sorcerer sends him into a cave and gives him a ring for protection as he is supposed to find this lamp, right? And while he's in this cave, crazy situation, he's like worrying a little, rubs his hands, and then poof, a Jinn appears, and because of the ring, he's able to command the Jinn, essentially. And we see a similar story when we hear the story about Solomon. And Solomon reputedly was able to command Jinn with a magical ring. There's another creature that comes from this Jinn belief to the West and gets a little mistranslated on the way. There's a type of Jinn called a ghoul, G-H-U-L. And you might recognize that as very similar to a ghoul, G-H-O-U-L. So this evil Jinn forms the basis of a monster that is so familiar to us from horror films, from spooky stories, or if you're a comic book fan like me, from the old EC classic comics like Tales from the Crypt and Vaults of Horror, where a ghoul was always just inexplicably showing up to eat things. And they weren't Jinn by that point, they just ate people. And speaking of horror movies, let's go to number 4, possession. Jinn are thought to possess human beings, men, women, children. This is an analog of sorts to the Christian belief, especially in the Catholic Church, that people could be possessed by a demon. But in this case, the possessor, the agent of possession, is a Jinn, which again could be good, could be evil. And Jinn also have different religions, by the way, so they could be Muslim, they could not be Muslim, they could be Christian. It's really a roll of the dice. These Jinn are driven out in an exorcism ritual called rudkya, which is the recitation of passages of the Quran. And you can watch footage of what people believe to be these exorcisms on YouTube right now. Though we do want to warn you, some viewers may find it disturbing. Why can you watch these on YouTube, you're asking? That leads us to number 5. Modern belief in the Jinn persists. This is not some ancient tall tale that was forgotten and remains a relic of folklore and mythology. No. People around the world believe that Jinn are real, and in certain universities you can find academics and scholars attempting to apply modern science to prove the existence of Jinn, which are in this belief system are not visible to human beings. They can see us, we can't see them. And so scholars are trying to prove the existence of this entire other civilization through various applications of modern science. They've touched on the idea of parallel universes, right? Some unknown form of energy, maybe even sentient energy, and more. This is not the only example of these sorts of beliefs existing. In Iceland, there's still, reputedly, a long-standing, widespread belief in a certain type of hidden folk, or essentially invisible creatures that may live in rocks, animist spirits of sorts. And this belief is powerful enough and widespread enough that it influences construction. People won't build roads or buildings in certain places for fear of angering these beings. All of which leads us to a question for you. What's going on in your neck of the global woods? Are there any beliefs in what other people might call supernatural creatures? And if so, have you had an experience with one? Do you believe it's real? Do you believe it's bunk? And as always, why? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. And do check out our audio podcast where we go into much further depth on the history, the etymology, the belief in Jinn. And in the meantime, if you have any topic suggestions, love to hear them. You can talk to us directly on Facebook and Twitter, where we are Conspiracy Stuff.